I think you're going to see Iran do similar to what it did in April, and this time it's going to be for real. April was a sort of a demonstration, a show of what they could do. And the problem is the West has convinced itself, oh man, we easily defeated uh, the Iranians with their missile and drone attack. We wiped them out. They couldn't. They, we're the best. Iran was sending a message that they didn't want to escalate. I think now what you're likely to see some massive intercontinental, ballistic missile strikes from Iran on military targets in Israel. I think we're going to have an enormous crisis in our financial markets. It's going to be precipitated by a combination of factors such as the cut off, at least temporary, in the flow of oil, and the shift away from the U.S. dollar as a principal means as the international reserve currency.
Hey guys, welcome back to Capital Cosm. Today we've got Larry Johnson on the show. Is this authentic, or is this simply a way to kind of elicit more money from the United States? Meaning, hey, I'm about to sign a peace deal. If you guys don't send me more money, send me more weapons, then I might just pursue peace with Russia. Is that what's going on, or is this maybe it is authentic? What do you think?
No, I think it's a ploy to try to get the Russians to stop their offensive. I mean, Russia's just tearing up Ukraine right now. It has accelerated its offensive operations. It's breaking through on several fronts in the Donbass, moving to the west pretty quickly, unlike what happened last year. And again, the West doesn't understand the Russian strategy. We keep saying, "Oh, they're no good because they can't beat Ukraine. They can't conquer Ukraine in a week." It's not the Russian strategy. It never has been. But Zelensky's trying to buy time, and they don't have time. The fact of the matter is, despite the West saying, "Hey, we got your back. We're behind you 100%," we have been we're unable to produce 155 millimeter shells in the quantity that at the rate the Ukrainians have been using it. Ditto for the artillery barrels. You fire enough rounds through an artillery barrel, you basically wear it out. It has to be replaced. Patriot missiles, the numbers on that are laughable. So Lockheed Martin right now produced 550 missiles. Now, I'm not talking launchers. I'm talking the actual missiles that get fired. 550 of them a year. So they're about, I guess, 1.5 a day, basically. Well, when a Patriot engages an inbound target, it's going to fire 2 missiles. We know that on December 28th, 29th last year, on one day in Ukraine, Russia fired a total of 244 missiles into Ukraine. If Ukraine had used Patriots against each of those Russian missiles, do the math, over 488 Patriot missiles. So in one day, in theory, Ukraine could use up 85% of everything that Lockheed Martin can produce in 1 year. That's unsustainable. So, what's going on here is the West is confronted with it can say everything it wants verbally. It can even write checks, send money, but it can't send weapons, and it can't create new Ukrainian soldiers. So Ukraine's in a desperate situation, and Russia. There was a time when Russia was willing to cut a deal. The last deal they offered, which was, okay, Ukraine, pull all your troops out of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, and cease military operations. Stop, climbing into bed with NATO, and then we'll talk peace. But you stop firing. And Ukraine's rejected that. No, that's a non-starter. Okay. Well, that was the good deal. The next deal that's going to come is unconditional surrender, because Ukraine's got no leverage in this. Ukraine can't say, If you don't do this, we're going to hold our breath till we turn blue. Okay, go for it. Russia is going to wind up in control of the most significant natural resources that Ukraine has, which are most are located primarily to the east. And we're talking oil, gas, coal, other rare earth minerals. So, I mean, it's a rich area. What most people don't recognize is that at the start of this war, Russia was the number one country in terms of natural resources. It could literally be, not could be, it is self-sufficient. It doesn't have to go outside to get things from other countries that it needs to continue to exist. Ukraine was number 5 in the world on that list. I mean, it's really rich in resources. But you have to step back and look and say, okay, why is it that Russia was still in the top 10 of world economies, even before the special military operation? Now it's, you said it's moved up to like number 4 as measured with PPP, and that Ukraine was the poorest. Well, Ukraine was following the model of sort of the African countries that had been under the control of colonial empires like Europe. I mean, in this case, they were really being bought out and controlled by a lot of folks on Wall Street. And those economic ties already got BlackRock is supposedly owns a third of Ukraine, except it's now under the possession of the Russians, so may not turn out well for BlackRock. But this war, it's coming to an end, I think, quicker than a lot of than anybody in the West expected. They were talking stalemate. This is going to go on for 2 or 3 more years. No, it's not. Ukraine does not have the ability to sustain combat operations, and it's totally dependent upon the United States continuing to send billions of dollars, which if we run into some severe economic turmoil, that check writing is going to stop.
Do you think this diminishes the risk of a kinetic war between Russia and NATO now that the Ukraine front is kind of coming to a close?
No. I see the West still acting foolishly, particularly in the United States. Now, what may help us sober up is what I think is getting ready to happen with Iran. The United States, candidly, we couldn't even fight a one-front war right now. We like to think that we have this magical ability to project force, and fail to recognize we couldn't defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan. We were 20 years in Iraq. How'd that turn out? There's just not Iraq's not there doing our bidding necessarily, and so we've wasted a lot of financial resources on these stupid overseas military adventures. The only thing that's really been good for is creating the illusion of a threat that then justifies an increased defense budget, which means if you're a shareholder of Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, BAE Systems, you're doing well. It's good. It's good, looking good. But Raytheon, oh yeah. But in terms of actual contributing to the national welfare and the improvement of economic conditions in the United States, no, it's impoverished us. It put us into a terrible debt situation. And it's really destroyed our influence in the world. It's not just, no longer, I think, are people even afraid of us. Not that I recommend being afraid of us, but they've lost respect for us. And we've gotten to the place where we become a one-note Sally. Do what we want, or else we're going to hit you up with sanctions. We're doing more sanctions now than ever before in history. And I wish, you don't have to be a CIA analyst to figure out what's the record of sanctions being used to produce a political outcome or a change in policy of another government. I would say 0. Well, we've imposed sanctions on Cuba, yeah. And has impoverished the Cuban people, but they're not begging us to, oh, please stop the sanctions and we'll do what you want. Same with Iran, China, Russia. We're talking about sanctioning India, sanction South Africa, sanction, we're like Oprah Winfrey giving away cars. Here's a car for you and a car, but when it's sanctions.
Yeah. So with the presidential election coming down the pike, there does seem to be a glimmer of hope when it comes to the Ukraine war with Trump and JD Vance. They both have signaled that they'd be willing to seek peace in that front. But by that same token, JD Vance, when his first interview after being nominated VP, he said he wanted to hit Iran hard. So is this, kind of like the thing that we saw with Afghanistan, right? We ended the war in Afghanistan, and then a year later, we started the war in Ukraine. Is this simply a matter of, shifting resources, from the Eastern European front to the Middle Eastern front? Kind of answer that question. People have this, and I think it comes from a good place, right? People have this hope when it comes to Trump that he will deviate away from the neocons, and that sort of thing. But do you really see that being the case?
Yes, with respect to China. Yes, with respect to Russia. No, with respect to Israel. And, continuing to create Iran as a boogeyman. Iran's the number one source of terrorism in the world. No, actually, it's not. It's the United States. And you go, what? Look, I say that as, my ancestors. I got 28 ancestors that fought in the American Revolution. My fifth great uncle was the Secretary of the Continental Congress and held the Declaration of Independence in his personal possession until delivered it 15 years later to the National Art, what was then we now know as the National Archives. So I say that with, I've got long roots in this country. What the United States did is, first we overthrew a government in Iran back in 1954 that was democratically elected, and we did it because we didn't like their policy towards wanting to keep their oil for themselves. We wanted to make sure that the oil companies that wanted control of that oil got it. Then, when the Shah, who we backed and who was notorious for torturing people, was overthrown by a popular revolution, but it was Islamic in nature. All of a sudden, we became schizophrenic because we couldn't stand. We were outraged. The Iranians had taken our people hostage, and I knew a couple of the ladies that were held hostage in that situation. But at the same time, what most Americans don't know is that from 1981 until 1987, the United States was secretly selling weapons to Iran, and we were using Israel as a cutout because we were trying to weaken the Iraqis. But just to show you how good we are at this, at the same time, we were also sending weapons material to Iraq that they were using to build chemical weapons that were being used against Iran. So our overall goal back then was we were playing Iraq. We were willing to play both sides of that, hoping that they destroy each other, which would then be seen as a way to weaken Soviet influence in the Middle East. But we went through this period where, on the one hand, the early days, Iran was backing groups, Hezbollah in particular back then. We were carrying out terrorist attacks against us. The bombing of the Marine barracks and then the bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in 1983. Of course, the other part of the story we don't tell is that those attacks on our Marines and our embassy only came after our battleships were heaving big shells into the Bekaa Valley, killing Palestinian, these, not just Palestinians, but Lebanese.
We've got, by my count, we should be looking at 2 retaliatory strikes, right? One from Hezbollah and one from Iran. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, no, I see Iran and Hezbollah coordinating on this, and it's not going to be just them. There are probably 10 other groups in the Middle East. Palestinian Islamic Jihad is one. They're all going to coordinate. The West hasn't paid attention to the fact that about 2 weeks ago, China convened in 14 of the Palestinian groups in Beijing. And these groups had been divided. Excuse me, I forgot this thing turned itself up for some reason. These groups have been divided for the last 40 years, each going their own way. China got them all to come together, shake hands, sign an agreement. Hey, we're going to join arms, and they're singing Kumbaya. So it's in the wake of that Israel's carried out these assassinations, and now these groups are feeling sort of we've got to stand together. We got to fight together. So you're likely to see a coordinated action. Now, people think that the United States, that we can easily defeat Iran. Iran's 4 times the size of Iraq, physically 4 times the size. And unlike Iraq, it's got massive mountain ranges in it. And a lot of the sensitive nuclear facilities that we'd want to destroy are buried underground in caves in those mountains. I know as part of my exercises with the U.S. military, I was involved with one exercise where we actually looked at what it would be required to attack one of those targets. And without going into the details, all I can tell you is it's not easy, and it's not like the Tom Cruise, latest Top Gun movie. It doesn't turn out well. We will get ourselves embroiled in a quagmire that we can't sustain. Because look, candidly, the only way you're going to defeat Iran is you're going to have to put troops on the ground. Well, hello, do we have a 2-3 million man army? No, we don't. Our current army is 452,000. And we forget that for the last 4 years, Iran has been conducting joint military exercises, particularly naval exercises, with Russia and China. So if we try to start a war with Iran, Iran's in a position that they can shut down the Gulf of Hormuz, which shuts down all oil coming out of the Persian Gulf.
Yeah.
And then the world has a problem.
Yep. And one of the big fears, for example, with the Ukraine-Russia war was the prospect of nuclear exchange.
Yeah.
Does that also exist with an Iran-Israel conflict?
Yes. More likely from Israel. Israel, if it's feeling desperate, could use what they call them a tactical nuke, but it's still a massive explosion. But it would likely lead to an escalation. Pakistan has threatened that it would get involved in at that point.
Mm.
And if Israel starts using nukes, you can't rule out what China and Russia will do. So this is, what's so crazy about all of this is the United States has been abandoning all of the treaties and agreements that we had in place, particularly with Russia, to try to control the use and spread of nuclear weapons. We're the ones that walked away. It was George W. Bush that walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty, the ABM, which then Russia said, okay, if that's what you want. Russia went off and built anti-ballistic missile defenses that can defeat our ballistic missiles tipped with nuclear weapons if we decided to get a nuclear war. So think about that. If I can give you an 80% confidence that you can defeat most of the nuclear weapons that I'm going to fire, and I can give you 100% confidence that every nuclear weapon you're going to fire at me is going to land, would you take that bet? Well, that it's the kind of thing that Russia's in a position that they could fight it and win it. And now, but Russia, having lost 27 million people in World War II, knows the cost of these wars. And that's why they're not eager to go down that route. The United States, on the other hand, do you know the total number of fatalities on U.S. military personnel lost in Iraq and Afghanistan in 22 years?
What is it?
Fewer than 8, about 7,300 last I counted.
Okay.
Total. Now, for those families that lost loved ones in that way, yeah, it's terrible. But come on, that's nothing. You know, you get that many killed in Chicago gun battles over 6, 7 years. You know, actually, I guarantee you've had more people murdered in Chicago from gang violence during that 20-year period, probably twice as many as were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I mean, we're bullshitting ourselves about where the violence and the threats are. I mean, if you got to come up with some tangible measure. How do you measure it? How about bodies for starters? And so when you just look at the gun violence alone in Chicago, and then, you know, it was safer to be in Afghanistan or Iraq. And in fact, that Spike Lee made that one movie, what do I call it, Chirac, you know, Chicago
Yep.
is Iraq. But it was true. So we're sort of casual and careless. We've never really paid a significant price in terms of loss of life in war. Same with World War II. I mean, that's our greatest generation. Yes, they are. But we lost, and then actually go back and try to find the total number we lost. U.S. government has terrible, terrible stats on this. I've seen numbers ranging from 270 to 470. So let's take the higher number, 470,000. That was in both Europe and Pacific. And when I say Europe, that includes the fighting in North Africa. 470,000. The Soviets in the Battle of Leningrad or Stalingrad, they lost 800,000 in that one battle. So just, let's do some comparison. And all of the war from Pearl Harbor to, the Japanese surrender in Tokyo Bay, we got 470,000 killed. Russians lost twice that many in just one battle. So they understand what the cost is.
Yeah.
And that's why every year they do their March of Immortals. Everybody is out in the street carrying a picture of their grandfather, great-grandfather, grandma, some relative in their family died in that war. Here we don't. So, hey, let's go to war. It's cost. Not only does it not cost us anything, we make money. It's great for the defense industry.
Is there a chance that the fighting comes home, as in, we see kinetic action happen within the borders of the United States?
Yeah. Russia's made that clear. Russia can hit us with conventional weapons if they choose to. And so and the United States has been warned now very clearly that if we proceed with deploying these intermediate range ballistic missiles into Europe, which was announced the other day in the Biden administration, and put them in Germany and Romania, Putin said, okay, we're going to do the same to you. They'll put missiles back in Cuba. We'll have a Cuban Missile Crisis again. But they also park submarines off our shores that are then ready to launch. So they're going to, what we're seeing is the hands on the nuclear clock are getting closer to midnight, not farther away. And it's all reckless. Trump was pressured and succumbed to it to pull out of the INF treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, in 2019. Now, up to this point, Russia has still continued to abide by it. But Putin announced, no, we're not, no more. Russia and the United States used to cooperate on the space station. Oh, the cooperation, hell, we were dependent on Russia. We couldn't get our own astronauts up to and from the space, the space station without relying upon Russians to transport us. And now the Russians, they're terminating that agreement. And basically say, you're on your own. We're not going to share the space station with you anymore either. We'll build our own. So, I can tell you're too young. You don't remember the Cold War. I grew up in it. So in 1972, we're coming out of the end of Vietnam. Russia, the then Soviet Union, had been supplying weapons and personnel. They were fighting us in Vietnam. They were killing American soldiers. And yet, in spite of that, the United States would still sit down with Richard Nixon, then president, talking to Leonid Brezhnev, who was the chairman of the Politburo, or then later Yuri Andropov, or Andrei Gromyko. We're talking to these guys. We had president to president exchange. Yeah, we were fighting these proxy wars against each other, but we recognized that this possibility of using nukes against each other was absolutely insane, and that we needed to converse and be in contact. That's not going on now. You saw Biden yesterday. Hey, you're talking to Putin. I don't need to talk to Putin. Oh, great. Yeah, we do need to talk to Putin. And what we've created is a situation that if, Donald Trump attempts to talk to Putin, he's just a puppet of Putin. He's a sellout to those Russians. And the odd thing is, what the Soviet Union was an oppressive system based on communism that rejected Christianity and that persecuted Christians. Current Russia is a capitalist society. It is a Christian society, and it venerates Christians as well as it has a degree of religious tolerance that I've not seen in the United States. And I've been to Russia now 3 times, which also makes me a sellout. Okay.
Well, Larry, we've talked about what should be done, but if you were to forecast or project out into the future, let's say the next, short term and midterm, what do you think is going to happen? As in, what will likely occur? Not what we want or what should occur, but what will likely happen?
I think we're going to have an enormous crisis in our financial markets. It's going to be precipitated by a combination of factors such as the cut off, at least temporary, in the flow of oil, and the shift away from the U.S. dollar as a principal means as the international reserve currency. So with the United States in that kind of financial crisis, we're going to see, China will regain complete control of Taiwan, but it's not. I don't think it'll be militarily. It doesn't have to do it militarily. The United States keeps talking about it, but we don't have the ability to project that kind of force. I think we're going to find out that our ability to control events with military power is going to blow up in our face. So we're going to, and all this is happening in time. We're going to be in political crisis in this country. If Donald Trump wins, he's going to face a massive outpouring of opposition from the other side. They're not going to give up. If Trump loses, Kamala Harris isn't going to have the support of the majority of the American people either. So we're going to see a time where America is going to be split down the middle, weak leadership that is held hostage to this is what I call foreign policy ideologies that are really counterproductive to our own national security. An example of that is that we've got to support Israel no matter what Israel does. Yeah, that's leaving us isolated in the world. And it used to be the United States was in a position we could dictate to some countries, like when the Brits got together with the French and the Israelis, and they attacked Egypt back in, what was it, 54, and took the Suez Canal. Eisenhower got on the phone and said, "Stop it now or else." And the Brits, the French, and the Israelis are forced to back down. The United States is not in a position to do that today. So we're entering a world in which China, the global South, is going to become more important both economically and politically, and China and Russia are going to be in control of that. And so far, the U.S. approach is to want to fight them. We're incapable of fighting them, but if we persist in fighting them, they'll fight us and they'll beat us, and then we'll have to deal with the first major defeat of a war, which could endanger even the homeland.
I see. Well, we can leave it on that note. Larry.
Cheery note, huh?
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the good news, Mr. Johnson.
That's what we brought you here for, Larry.
Yeah.
Well, hey, before we sign off, anything else you want to talk about that we didn't get a chance to get to? And tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, I'm at sonar21.com, SONAR21.com. We didn't even talk about the screw up by the Secret Service, which I think there's compelling evidence to suggest that it was the deliberate screw up. They sort of allowed it to happen. But
Do you want to come back on for that one sometime in
yeah,
the
we
next
can do.
week or two?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that sometime if you like.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
And if
well,
anything breaks out in the Middle East, we can also get an update from you as well. So
yeah, I've got a couple of articles posted at Sonar 21. Interviewed one of my good friends. He ran Reagan's Secret Service detail after Reagan was shot. I don't want to have the guy that was running the detail when Reagan was shot because, hey, you're a failure. But he also was involved with the training division, setting up the training protocols. Very knowledgeable, and boy, he is really, really disturbed by the failures of the Secret Service in this. And we could burn up a good hour talking about that.
yeah, yeah. Well, let's put that in the book somewhere. And yeah, guys, if you enjoyed this content, type "Go Larry Go" in the comments. Go Larry Go. Like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so we can keep getting guests like Larry on. And yeah, I'll see you next episode. Bye, y'all.